It's exactly 2 minutes gone past the hour of 9 o'clock. It is Tuesday, the 10th day of the month of October. Welcome to The Point. I want to say thank you wherever you are. Those of you in television, that's GBN Channel 7, Channel 11, Channel 20 if you're in cable. Or you're joining me in Classic 105.5 or 105.9 on the FM band. And we want to say thanks to those of you that's chiming in via social media, via YouTube or our Facebook page. Thanks for being part of the conversation. My guest this morning, no stranger to the GBN, no stranger to Grenada. She's a former health minister, former tourism minister, and today sitting here representing the new National Party on Opposition Tuesday. It is Clarice, Modeste, Curwen. My dear lady, I want to say thanks and welcome to the program. How are you?
I am pretty good, and thank you for having me this morning. I want to say good morning to Grenada, Carriacou, Petit Martinique, and to everyone listening to your well-listened to program, wherever they are in the world, globally.
Thank you. And when Ms. Curwen says that we're doing good, you must let her know that we are together sharing ourselves a nice cup of big time tea. No sugar? Kick-starting of the morning.
No sugar.
Wonderful. Lady Curwen, there's so much that can be discussed, to be discussed. I think, let us start with the current, I'm not even sure to what you refer to it as the debacle. Is it a fiasco? Or let's just put on the context, the current situation as it relates to the Housing Authority and the houses, the projects. What is your thought? There's a lot that has been happening. There was an evaluation that was done which shows that the Housing Authority was in some financial troubles, and that is one story by itself. But I think centered to that is the issue of the allocation of houses. And you hear now the homes, when they were first a project was first incepted, from all understanding, it was intended for the more vulnerable in society. All of a sudden, we get in a sense that seems to be history, and there's another school of thought that seems to be given precedence.
Okay, yes, it's a topic that is of concern to all of us in the opposition, in the new National Party, and to me as a citizen of Grenada and a person who has sat in cabinet and listened to the policies, the guidelines that cabinet would have issued on that. I was in the government when Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, some years ago, I was trying to remember this morning, I couldn't remember how long, but quite a few years ago, and the then Minister for Foreign Affairs, that was then the Honorable Elvin Nimrod, went to China, and one of the things they requested was low-income housing. I remember that very well because previously there had been two medium income housing projects. Two of them, two were in St. Mark. One was done before, one was done for about 16 persons. That was single units, quite nice, a good bit of land, administered by the Housing Authority of Grenada. And then it wasn't enough for the applicants, and so there was a Cuban housing project, again in the same area, Diamond Estate. That is an area where you had a fair amount of government lands, and so we were able to do that. And so this is the fourth housing project in St. Mark. The first one is many years ago by Uncle Gary.
Okay.
I think he deserves to be commended for that. And then followed by those other two. And then this low income, because even some persons who would have been considered to be medium wage persons, a few of them had difficulties to access the housing. And we believe that housing is a basic right of people. Not that it's a right that you just get a house for free, but it's something that human beings need. And And so it's a basic human need that needs to be satisfied. And of course, a lot of persons, if you look throughout the length and breadth of Grenada, Curwen, Pitimotic, they go to the bank or wherever they get their monies from. They build their own houses. Beautiful houses, some very small, nicely done. But there are some persons who cannot afford. There are some persons who may not have the lands and so on. And so government needs to be a facilitator in certain cases. And so the middle income houses were started. And I well recall when I looked at the list, how it was administered by Housing Authority, and when I looked at the list of names, many of the people who were approved, I didn't know them. They were not from St. Mark. And while in principle I had no problem with persons from other parts of the island coming to get houses, and that is our government's general policy. Our party's general policy. But if you doing a project in any area, any parish, some of the constituents must have access to it. Otherwise, it is flawed. And therefore, I raised it in Cabinet. I remember Cabinet directed Housing Authority, the few people who couldn't quite make that jump, that they facilitate, because the bank would look at a number of things, as you know. What is your income? What are your expenses? And so on. And some of them fell short by a little bit. But the bank don't want a little bit. You either you make it or you don't.
Right.
And so it was government, we felt it was our responsibility there. And there are a few people who had the price adjusted to give them access. So they went to the bank, they were able to afford it, and they have the houses.
But help me though, because we keep hearing the term being bandied about, low income. And when the project was first conceptualized, was it determined what the threshold would be, and how do you qualify, and what was the prescribed dollar and cents value that was? Because remember, at the end of the day, the conversation, some would argue, it's low income, not no income.
Very much so.
So what was the principle that was guiding the process?
So even as we say low income, we sought to strike a balance. So first of all, we were well aware, and I hope that sometime my colleague and friend, Honorable Delma Thomas, could, put some clarity into that, as she was the then Minister for Housing and the then Minister for Social Services. And so there were persons who were really in dire need of housing who could not afford it, either elderly or sick or had some disability. And so one of the guidelines was that some houses should be set aside for them. So, a small percentage for those really needy persons who could not afford and had nobody to help them. And those houses would remain government houses. So you place them there for their lifetime. And when they pass on, then it goes back to government so that persons in similar situations can do that. So although it said low income, it was primarily for people with low income, but also it gave consideration to persons with no income as well, but to a smaller extent. Now, the income would determine how much a person can pay. And I, for one, I want to state categorically, if persons can afford to pay, I say it for health and I say it for housing, they have to pay. Because nothing is totally free. If you don't pay for it, somebody else is going to pay. And therefore, if persons can afford to, I think they should. So I know that the Housing Authority did the logistics, do some costings and so on as required, and a little bit of insurance was factored into the medium salaried persons, those houses for them. And they did for this one. And what I'm hearing is around 45,000 they came up with. And after taking into consideration the types of people that we wanted to help, the consideration was somewhere between 25 and 35.
Okay.
But one thing I'm sure about is that there was no issue of them going to the bank, because these were for persons who would not usually qualify for bank. Most of them, there may be a few, but the majority were not.
So what was the plan, though, as to how they would finance getting the home? Let's assume, okay, you were envisioning at 35,000, and we now hearing 50,000, 70,000, right? What was the plan? They're low income, yes. How were they going to satisfy the repayment, therefore, of that loan?
Okay, so that is why this figure was adjusted to about that, and I could stand corrected on that. So because some tell me 25, some say 35. I don't have a document that speaks to that in front of me, but I know that is where we were looking at, and so these were people who have a job, who would probably pay maybe $100, $200 a month, but certainly not in the 400s and above, which was what persons in the previous housing project would have been paid, around 400.
Okay.
So it was to adjust it so that they could, and to assess persons, and that took some time, to assess persons in terms of their income and their needs, so that the price would be adjusted for them, so that it would be affordable and accessible.
Okay, fair enough. So is it that the concern here is that the cost as it is isn't affordable, or do you think as it is, it eliminates persons at the lower threshold from being able to access, have access to?
I think it's both. It's both. Because we put a threshold somewhere between 1,000 per month and 1,200. You know, the cost of living. And so the dynamics have changed a bit, because now the cost of living has gone up tremendously. Everybody's complaining, and we can't blame anybody for that. That is the situation globally. What we do about it, though, what the government does is the government's responsibility and their prerogative and their duty to do for the persons who cannot afford. So that price needed to be revisited, and I don't think 55 for one bedroom. And you know, a lot of the people with low income, they have a number of children. There's a reality in Grenada. So a one bedroom may not satisfy a lot of people. So even the very poor might still need at least a 2-bedroom. So, and I heard 70, let's say 70.
Right, that's the figure.
Somewhere there.
To 70.
Yeah. So I think it is really inaccessible to the majority of people for whom the project was designed. That's why it was given free. But the cost is supposed to take care of things like maintenance, the servicing, keeping the place clean, the insurance, because the place has to be, maintained structurally and otherwise. And so I believe people should pay something, but I do not believe that they've taken the time to assess the candidates, the applicants, and if the records would show, and it is with housing, because I got my copy from housing. I didn't fix the list myself.
Right.
There are some names in red and some names in green. These people were assessed by social services in need of a home, either because of their social situation or because of their economic situation. And so if you're telling everybody go to the bank and you make no allowance for persons who be given approval by the bank, then I think it is very, very faulty.
So let me ask the question again. I mean, very often when this conversation comes up, it gets muddled between individual people's reality, what the economic reality is, and it honestly gets muddled in the politics, which unfortunately, I think we can both appreciate how this goes. You raised a concern though about persons getting access, especially in St. Mark, which is your constituency, and your concern is that there were persons who were previously earmarked as being constituents who for some reason now they are not being afforded that opportunity. How much of a concern is you, and what have you been able to appreciate is the reasons being that they are not able to realize that dream?
Okay. The first thing is, I just want to clarify that while it's primarily for people from St. Mark, that list has people from a few other areas, and I'm happy for that. And if a few of them get, I'll be happy. So I want to make that clear. Then, in terms of why they cannot afford, some people are unemployed. As I mentioned, due to ill health or age or whatever, they're unemployed. Some people are underemployed. And I'm really pleased that the government is looking at minimum wage, because although they're employed, if they're receiving a minimum wage, they cannot do what they have to do. So maybe this is something that can be considered, since in January the prices would go up. Would you hold a house for a person who in January will get a better income? I don't know. So it is both either unemployed or underemployed. And most of the people who are employed in St. Mark, they have to go to St. George. The traveling and the expenses to go to St. George also puts the expenses in a different category, and so it is difficult for them. So I want to beg the government of the day to reassess. There is a rush. People need it, and people have been waiting for, what, better part of 2 years? And I understand that too. But if we hasten and we leave out the really needy persons, we might find that we're creating a situation that will be untenable in our country.
Two questions I want to throw at you. There are those who've fronted the argument that the project, when it was initially conceived, was structured in such a way that it allowed for political expedience. What would be your response to that? In that, okay, my party's in government, the persons that's given the opportunities to get housing would be supporters. Some have argued that has been the crux of the matter.
In everything, I look at the news, there's a little bit of politics. No, I mean, that is the reality of the day. There might be one or two names come up, and I might give them, I might, want to see them have it. But the process was pretty objective. There are a few people who came to our office. We had forms. They filled out the forms. But all forms went to the Ministry of Housing, and a lot of assessment was done by the staff of the Ministry of Housing and persons in the Ministry of in the Housing Authority. That is what, and they sent, and the majority of people went directly to the ministry and filled out the forms. So they were assessed, and the red line and the green line came from there.
But Ajita, you're saying assessed and approved, or it was still in process?
No, the approval was still in process. Okay. Nobody was given approval yet. So it is difficult for persons to say that there was a political favor in selection, because that hadn't been done yet. We were in the process of doing it, and we relied very heavily on the Ministry of Social Services to do that.
How much of that process, that approval process, the entire process, application, how much of that has changed? Were persons asked to reapply, or are they being guided by the same criteria?
I am told that persons, I don't want to say something that is incorrect, but I think I heard, and you hear all of the press conferences and the news better than I do, that persons who are interested can reapply. But the original list would have been given consideration, and to be honest, a few of the people who were called, they came to me and they told me that they have been called. They were on the list. They didn't do anything more during this new government's time, but they were called. So I'm happy for that.
One of the challenges going forward is striking a balance to make that allows and makes the Housing Authority financially viable. The report suggested that one of the problems was that of delinquency loans. Persons given properties, and for some reason, and I think if I remember, they were saying that the entity, as it is in the red financially.
Okay.
So how would you suppose we play the balancing act in one, making the housing authority viable, and then ensuring at the same time that we satisfy the basic needs, because housing, it is a basic need, food, shelter, and clothing, and I think we're on the same page of that. There's no arguments to that's an individual's your basic needs, but there is a balancing act to be played.
Sure.
How do you suggest we play that balancing act?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, because sometimes I look at the private sector, how they are driven by profits, and I look at the government sector, and we're not, and we have to fund the lion's share of what happens in the country. So it's a very, very, very relevant question. Couple of things. I am a little bit surprised that housing authority is in the red. I would concede that when persons get things that belong to the government, even though it's through one of the statutory bodies, there's that kind of tendency more than if they get it from a private person. I would concede, and I want to beg the nation, let those bodies that do their work empower them to do more work and better work by paying if you can pay. So I'm surprised, because I know, and I had seen figures, and I would like the present government to review that, where housing authority was showing that they were in the green. Is it black or green?
Well, I mean, the last report I showed it.
No. I'm not doubting that. So I'm just asking, how did it get there? Because they used to do that. Housing authority did very well in a couple areas, and I'll tell you where. They did block making. They could not make enough blocks. Over in the year that we were there, in the last few years, they did very well with that, and they showed a profit, and they were encouraged. They also did houses, which they used lands that government had vested in them, so they didn't have to pay for the lands, and therefore the monies they made from selling the houses, house and land, they made monies there, and they did a few in St. Mark, and in the same Diamond area, because that's where they have lands vested in them, and they have been doing island wide. So I didn't realize that they were in the red. I must say that they had showed that they were viable and able to take on more projects. From whatever last I saw when we were in office, I can't give you the exact time. So I am wondering how we went from there to that. But you ask, how can we strike the balance? One, maybe get involved in this kind of projects like the block making and so on, because there's a high demand for blocks, and maybe there are other things. Secondly, though, where the balance could be struck, if we look at the lower cost for the houses, the one bedroom is 55,000. We have about 600 houses, a little more than 600 houses, and if you multiply 600 by 55,000, that is about $33 million, Does the government or housing need that? And we're not talking about the 70 yet. Does the government need all of this money to do other projects, or does housing need it? Or could housing need some of that money that they would make to offset some of the cost for the indigent and so on? How do we strike that balance?
There is a balance, but
yes.
but the challenge is, and one of the harsh realities is that center to them being in the financially challenge is the fact that because the projects, very one of these projects, they are catered for the financially challenged, and at the end of the day, they're not able to pay back. So a person gets a home, they agreed it's going to be $5 at the end of the month, and they're in.
When some are going to the bank,
When they get in,
some are.
Well, and that's where the argument is, and that's where the argument is being made. Because if you're going to go to the bank, and some people are saying, well, because they're poor, they can't go to the bank. But then the reverse argument is, if you give them either way, outside of the banks, they're still not going to pay.
So charge them something that they can afford, and be strict on the collection. And there are some people who cannot afford, give it to them free. It was given to us free.
Or can we then suggest, because one of the arguments that's been put forward is that yes, the project has been long outstanding, but you've been heard of some repairs, updated work that has to be done, and a lot of investments that was made into getting the project to the housing unit to an appreciable standard that allows for living. And then there's a cost to that. So some have argued, why not allow the project to go on as it is, and then we can invest into a project that really caters for persons that are really financially down and out, because there are other housing projects, there are other projects available. That argument has been...
So yes, there's another 1,000 houses. It was 2,000 houses, and I've heard various persons in different NDC regime look to swap it. Why not upgrade the stadium? Why not build 2 hotels instead? And we were always insistent that there are people who needed houses now. So while all of these were important, people who needed houses now. Now, these people and them have been waiting for years. So you sell it as is. You sell it to persons who could afford.
Okay.
To go to the bank. Why not let government housing authority take on the collection of the money? Charge less, and you will still get, if you get in for the 55,000 houses, if you cater in for $33 million, if everybody could go to the bank, then why not? Wouldn't 20 million do it? Another housing project later on, but for other persons who become in need, but take care of those who presently need.
Well, that is an argument, and I'm probably thinking that when you look at what's happening out there, the conversation continues to be that a lot of these statutory bodies that's been run, they find themselves in the red. Take, for instance, the marketing, the MNIB, for years. Do you then allow the housing authority to become yet another victim? I guess it's an open argument.
But the housing authority has done a good job in identifying projects and getting into profitable things. As I mentioned before, I don't want to go there. Maybe the government can come up with some requirements, some demands from the housing authority, that they be more vigilant, that they collect and do certain things, because there are ways to know if people are employed. There are ways to know what people's wages are. And so if you take care of the indigent, my concern is take care of the indigent first.
Okay.
Right? And there are not many. In Sembach, I was looking at 5-8 persons who I know lived under very deplorable conditions,
right,
and so on. Because our house repair program was taking care of a lot of the needs in terms of housing and shelter. It just didn't do enough. And some people who were indigent, they lived in structures that did not belong to them. Right. The land did not belong to them. So government still had to come up with some kind of low income or no income for them. So it's not a lot of people.
Okay.
Then those who get $1,000, $12, why not come up with something, a way that they could pay and not have to go to the bank and be turned away, so that they can have access, because they have been waiting and their names on the list. So knocking out their names from the list, giving it to other new persons and saying, hold on, wait until the next 1,000 houses come up. I heard something about some 500 houses project being launched. We don't know what's going to happen. So to tell people, hold on where you are, getting wet in the rain, and so on, until we can come up with another one, I find that one is a hard one.
Well, however this one turns out, I do agree with you that government, of course, has a responsibility, but I think it's a question of the balancing act. Where do you maintain viability? But the good thing to the argument is not that all isn't lost, but certainly it's always going to be a challenge if one is asked to go to a financial institution who they themselves wants to make sure that they remain viable, and they're not just going to give out money to anybody randomly. But we'll see how. I mean, for the purpose of time, we are going to leave that conversation there. 29 minutes gone past the hour. We're going to open up the telephone lines in in just a bit. But certainly, healthcare has also been, and not has, will always be, because you were trained medical, but you're a doctor by profession. So it's not that it has been. It will always be something that's close to your heart. What's your thoughts on what's happening in the healthcare sector?
Well, I am hearing so much, and it is disturbing. And I always come. Remember, I told you I'm the sheep to the slaughter. I come prepared to take the blows, but you have to be realistic, because people tend to say, "Well, why you didn't do it?" and all of that. Whatever it is, I have some concerns. So one is, I saw a document. I don't know if it is legitimate or not, and I have not been able to get any confirmation, because the buck was being passed on in terms of who is responsible for that document, which was meant for the public to say that a certain institution, Princess Alice, was only taking on emergencies because there's a shortage of doctors, of staff. And well, nobody seems to know where it came from, but it went out. So I just have a few questions. Where did that come from? Who sent it? How acute is the shortage? I know it's there, it's bad. We know nurses are going, doctors are going, and people give you horror stories of the numbers. I don't know if they have really crunched it, but it's it's not comforting. And secondly, if there's a situation, there has to be some mechanism set up for the persons who you tell don't come except you have an emergency. Who do they call to explain what is their situation? Because even in the United States, you have doctors now that people call, on-call doctors by phone, to say what problems they're having, and they're advised what to do, where to go. So I haven't heard of any structure like that set up to assist persons in determining, do I have an emergency? Because everybody who's sick for them has an emergency. How do they determine that? So I am concerned about these factors, and what can we do as a nation? I'm talking about as a nation now. This exodus of professionals has been there from time immemorial. It has worsened in the last few years, because if you listen to BBC, you listen to CNN and other stations, people from since COVID, some healthcare professionals don't want to work in that field anymore.
True.
I know it was a bad experience. And so they have a shortage, and they don't care where they get people, as long as they get. And Grenada is known to have very good healthcare professionals. They're taking them, and they're offering them really lucrative, attractive terms and conditions that make it easy for them to go. And I'm not blaming, but we have to do something. Either we take on, because when I heard that the police were going, then I saw advertisements for recruiting police. I haven't seen anything to seriously recruit nurses. So if you cannot stem the hemorrhaging, then do something about training more people in some basic skills in short time, so that they can do, and they can. Our nurses have always done hands-on training. Let's go back. If it's not there anymore, let's go back to that, but let's do something. It's a national problem. I am willing to give my 2 cents. It might not be appreciated, but I would do it anyway. And I'm sure there are other persons who would be willing. We have to, Grenada, we have to deal with it. That's number one. I have not heard the government speak to it, nor the minister. The other thing that concerns me, and it has concerned me since this government came in office, is the shortage of medication and supplies. I have heard nothing again, and I dare say the nation has not heard whether we have paid the money to the OECS Pharmaceutical Procurement Unit. Have we paid it? Are we back there? And just a few days ago, a nurse, I heard a nurse, she told me, well, people get accustomed to, when they come to the hospital, they get a prescription and they go and get a medication, or they leave their family on the bed and they go and buy the medication. But how much can you buy? And how much cash will you have at that point in time when the family needs it? So these are my two major concerns, and I just also want to express how proud I am that we have a cutting-edge CT scan at the General Hospital, and that we were in office when the arrangement and the negotiations were being made, and it was commissioned under Honorable Nicholas Steele, and I think Sister Delma was there at the time.
Okay.
And to thank the Maria Holder Foundation for that contribution to our healthcare.
One of the things I have often said, I think is a challenge to our growth and development before we take our break, is that government should be a continuum. And I think very often that's the challenge that affects ministries like healthcare and all of that, is that we need to put in place short, medium, long-term plan. That it doesn't, notwithstanding which administration comes into power. If it's healthcare, it's for the people, let it go through. But one of the questions I wanted to ask, though, to shed some light, the issue of shortage of medication. I'm almost certain that I heard it was that the minister stood up in Parliament and did clearly articulate that the bills were paid. And that issue is also my understanding that arrangements that have been made with local suppliers so as to ensure that we don't find ourselves in that quandary again. So is it that you're asking if it has been paid? Or is it that you seeking clarity? Because I was of the impression, and maybe somebody else, but I am of the understanding and impression that it was paid, that the minister said quite clearly that it was paid. But you're asking the question, somebody out there is going to give us an answer. We'll take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll open up the telephone lines and to allow you, the general public, to be part of today's conversation. We'll be right back.
Introducing the NIS Dream Loan, where possibilities are boundless and your aspirations are our priority. No matter where life takes you, NIS Dream Loans are here to make your dreams a reality. From purchasing your first plot of land or dream property to renovating spaces, building your home, and seamlessly switching mortgages, we cater to every step of your journey. And here's what sets us apart. We offer easy financing options with competitive interest rates, quick approval processes, and flexible repayment terms. So why wait? Apply now and let our dedicated NIS team guide you through this exciting journey. Visit nisgrenada.org/dream loan or call 440-3309 to book an appointment. Terms and conditions apply. Your dream awaits.
The National Lotteries Authority is a proud sponsor of many cultural activities within the Tri-Island state of Grenada.
My name is Anderson Matheson, also known as Leftist, and I'm a calypsonian and string band music player from Carrico. I support the games of the National Lottery Authority because culture benefits tremendously. Annually, the NLA supports the Carrico and Petit Matinee Carnival, the Carrico String Band Music Festival, and all regattas, among other activities. When I play the game of the NLA, I can see where my money goes, and it's an investment into our culture.
Yes, Grenada, when you play the games of the NLA, you enable us to invest in the skills and talents of our people in the areas of sports, culture, and nation building.
Coming up on Caribbean passport? Food and rum cravings acting up? Well, it's that time of year in Barbados. Over 1,000 runners on the streets of Port of Spain. It's the newest road race challenge, a Pan-Am's premiere. It's all next on this station.
Welcome back to the Point. It's 20 minutes on to the hour of 10 o'clock. My guest this morning is former Health Minister, Representative and Tourism, former Tourism Minister, Representative of the New National Party, Ms. Clarice Modeste Curwen. We're going to go straight to the telephone lines. Good morning, caller. You are live.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Cadore, and good morning to Ms. Clarice.
Yes, good morning to you.
Glad to hear the discussion concerning the housing this morning. But I just want to go back to the minimum wage before I end up with the housing. Ms. Clarice, don't you know that I think it's every 3 years that you make a little adjustment with the minimum wage? Ms. Clarice, you is one of the longest serving person in government. Ms. Clarice, 10 years. Nobody ever discussed the minimum wage. Ms. Clarice, if you all had loved the poor and vulnerable as I preach, don't you know all you should have do a little adjustment by now that the poor and vulnerable salary, they could have able to go to the finance body to get a little loan to buy a little house to live. Miss Clarice, don't you know I don't know if NDC love the working people more than NNP, because the last raise was NDC do a little adjustment, and now they still come back and doing a little adjustment for the poor and vulnerable salary. So I would like you to pong on this with the minimum wage and why are you never address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller. Do you care to?
Okay, yes. Thank you, caller, for making that observation. No government is perfect, but while I take your point. I have no argument there, but I also want to draw to your attention that in terms of job creation and job opportunities and training to empower persons for job, there is no government that has done more than the New National Party for people and for poor people. So, it's give and take, and I agree with you. Should have been done. But in terms of empowering poor people, we have done quite a lot of that.
We go back to we have lost that call, 440-435-2041. That is the number on the inside. We have a caller. We go back to the telephone lines. Good morning, caller.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Go ahead, please.
Yes. The question of medications. The NNP was in power for 23 and a half years, and there was always a shortage of medication. That's the first one. Secondly, the question of pit toilets. Now, 23 and a half years in power, by now, when the 23 and a half years, we shouldn't have one pit toilet in Grenada. We shouldn't have one pit toilet in Grenada after 23 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, caller.
Okay, so the medication. There probably will always be shortage. But when it becomes so acute that a significant percentage of persons have to be given a prescription and sent to a pharmacy to get medication for a relative or somebody who is in hospital, then I think it is extremely serious. In terms of NNP being in office, NNP's record will show that we serviced our loans with the OECS PPS to the point where the minister said we had only an outstanding balance of $1 million. $1 million for medication is very small because governments pay millions for medication. And, from any source, government could have gotten that money and paid. It should not have taken all of those months. So maybe when NNP goes back, NNP may still have some shortages. But this is the worst shortages I have ever seen in the history of Grenada Carriacou.
But let's put this into perspective. That the shortages, of my understanding, is as a result of outstanding debts that were not serviced. Now, if we decide to look at the timeline, the issue of the shortage came into question early in the year, right? The ruling administration has been in power a year. Well, it took the anniversary was in June. So someone begged to ask the question: is the challenge that we see now with the shortages, is this an overflow from then to now, or is it something that developed just within a few months? Some would argue it must have been there already.
Okay, so let me explain to you. That is some money is owing to what we call the OECS Pharmaceutical Procurement Unit. This is our baby, the OECS baby. So we purchasing from ourselves, but it's a unit that is established to get more favorable conditions for purchasing for the Eastern Caribbean. Now, when you make your order, you don't send the money. It's not usual that you send the money with the order. And it is not usual that you pay all of it at the same time. So it is paid in installments, and they always have some reservoir cash that they can purchase more. So this system will always have a balance. So $1 million is not an insurmountable balance, and that could have been dealt with. So even if they met something, any government coming in will always meet a balance. But it was not a ridiculous balance, 1 million, and if the government had the will to do it, within short time they could have dealt with it because they met a pregnant treasury.
I'm going to go to the telephone line. Good morning, caller. You're live.
Good morning to both guests and host.
Good morning to you, sir.
1808, an Englander. So Walter Scott wrote a poem which began like this: oh, what a tangled web we weave, because first we practice to deceive. I have learned a couple of things in my little life, and this is a powerful statement. I've learned also that demagoguery and lies furthers the perpetrator from reality. Just these little comments before my question, it's right there. I've learned too that improvision and incompetence derail people's thoughts to the fact that they get lost, and so they get more confused than flammers in redance. Zealousness is also a thing that's important, and we all have to have a level of zeal stroke zealousness. But when it is not based on knowledge and understanding above all, it can be disastrous. Madam guest, quote unquote, do you share my views? For what it's worth, do have a nice day, will you?
Thank you.
Quite an indictment.
Telling you,
your thoughts?
Quite a lot of words. So, is it an indictment? And if it is, on whom? So, I have listened. The caller seems to be well learned, or I have a wealth of information available to him and would have used it. So, perhaps what we can all do, we can learn from what you have said, and we can all endeavor to apply it to our own lives and see how we go. So thank you, caller, for that.
We go back to the telephone lines. Good morning, caller.
Yes, good morning to you, sir, JC.
Good morning.
And good morning to the Senator, your guest. Now, my concern is with the housing. I learned from the news that the houses was not given do low income to the people to keep. And then if they would die, they would have to pass it back to the government. Trust me, I don't see that being a low income at all. If I have offsprings and I die and I cannot pass what I own to my offspring, I hadn't anything. That was a bad deal for the price then. If you're going to make houses available to people as low income for the price, when they finish paying, it should be theirs. Yeah? And so to me, that was a misside. I don't know if it was deliberate, but it's a misside. If government want to rent houses for people, say so. We're building this house for rental, and the rent is XYZ. You rent, you leave. But if the people couldn't leave because they didn't have the means to build a house, then on finished paying for the house, they should have the house. In other words, renting to buy. That's what's supposed to be arrangement. So trust me, that was really, really, really bad deal, and it was, to me, it was not honest at all. Yeah? I'm very, very concerned about that. And that's why I'm saying government should not build houses for people. Put people to work. Give them a salary. Let them go to the bank and build a house for themselves instead of those arrangements. Have a great day, sir.
Thank you very much, caller.
Yes, I am not sure if there's a misunderstanding of what I said. Because I did say that primarily the houses would attract some kind of payment. But those who paid, the houses belong to them. The government will not take back the houses. It's not for renting. So I don't know if it's something I said that may have given you that impression, but nothing I said should have given you that. But I still want to clarify. So the persons who paid for the houses, theirs, they pass it on to whomever they wanted to. But there are a few indigent who don't seem to have family. They don't seem to have anybody. Nobody looking after them, nobody doing anything for them. And the state has taken responsibility for them. There are various, groups of persons who go to their homes, cook for them, clean, whatever. So people like that, and they live in a house that doesn't belong to them. Then the government had considered and had planned to have a few set aside for those people.
Okay.
So if they die, it should go back to the government, and the government, whoever the powers that be who make the determination, social services or who would determine, well, another person is in need of it. And that is how it is. So, but those persons who would have paid and contributed to maintenance and so, the houses would have belonged to them. So maybe there's a misunderstanding, caller. I'm sorry.
A question that's been posted on social media. St. Mark and St. Patrick is known to be the poorest country in Grenada. Long and short, this person is asking, you've been the longest serving MP. Can you explain why is it that these two parishes, and St. Mark as well, sit so low under the poverty level?
Okay, there are a couple of factors, and we have looked at it, and that is maybe why St. Mark got all these housing projects and other things to help to boost up the area. One of it would be the location. And I'll give you a simple example. And I have assisted persons to apply to the hotel sector. Wherever I see applications, and for areas maybe where you need high skills as well as areas where you do not need high skills. Somebody goes to a hotel facility that the work ends all about 10 o'clock in the night for the bulk of staff. And they tell you they're from Sotes or Victoria. The thinking is that those kind of hours don't allow flexibility for transport, and these people are not transported to where they live. Persons who work at the airport, and this is something that I really tried to intervene, and even yesterday I was on a program where I was throwing out to buses, let's do some later runs. So people who live in those areas cannot compete with with anybody who lives in St. George, for example, for one of those jobs where you need flexible hours, early hours or late hours. That is one of it. The distance is part of it. The other thing is that apart from these jobs, most other jobs are that far. And if you look at the low income, people will tell you, look, if I have to pay so much for a bus, buy clothes to go to work, whatever, my expenses to go to work are more. And it's the same pay as everybody else who in the city. And when I look at what I take home, it is small. So government has, and I know under the New National Party, and if the person wants to speak about me, we have in terms of all programs to empower young people, we have gotten our fair share. We had up to about 100 persons, whether it's in the Imani, whether it's the Empower, and there were a number of them, the Fly program. So persons were trained so that they could be self-employed as well as employed. We did training for women to teach them how to do business, how to get into their own business, and about 25 of them were given equipment. So whatever you wanted to do, like get into the food business, you were given a freezer, you were given a fryer, things like that.
For the purpose of time, can you say with any form of measure of conviction that's assistance and training translated itself into local industries that became sustainable and viable so that it can support further employment?
There are some that have. Not enough. I must say, some persons took it and they say, well, think slow, and they didn't do it. But there are some that I'm very proud of. There are some who did the Empower program. I know one guy who is always on the ball looking for something to do with weed eating, and so he got his weed eater from that. I know persons who do like barbecuing, and so they got all of this from that. So it's not a great income earner, but it is a steady income earner. And what we have to do is to see the economy really get an injection again so that these people can get new jobs. But I think our location really works against us.
Well, I won't speak too much of the location. I'm not from St. Mark, but I think one of the challenges I've seen over the years, failure in our transportation system, and it's really, really disheartening that we haven't in 2023 that Grenada is having a conversation about needing a transport system. When I was growing up in the 70s, we were able to leave St. George, go to the St. Andrew, go to Guelph, and you got a PTS back down. One came at 9, one came at 10. It's unfortunate that all these years that I have to say that we have regressed quite honestly, and I think it's an indictment against our leaders for lack of vision. And we'll take this caller here. Good morning, caller. You're alive.
Good morning. Thank you, and good morning to you and the guests. Two things. One was the issue of minimum wage being raised. And it seemed as though job employment sort of was more or less a substitute for, because the speaker made mention of the fact that the government created a lot of jobs and so forth. But the thing about it is, even though people get jobs, right, if the salary is low, most of the time they can't even, they hardly bring home anything because they have to borrow money to pay bills, to buy food, to buy clothes, and, they have to prepare themselves. And it costs money. So creating more jobs will not necessarily solving the problem of minimum wage. All right. The other thing is caller made mention of the fact that there shouldn't be any pit toilet in Grenada. I understand what he's saying, but it is not always easy because some people are renting they have the house on land that they are renting from, and government cannot just go in and do what they want to do with wall structures and so forth. So I know of a case where persons had to get permission from the landlord in order to allow the government or housing authority to do such things for them. So it may seem as though it's supposed to be.
Hello, caller. But okay, I think we lost the caller, but I think
so let me
get the gist of what you're
just
saying.
take the pit latrine and the bathroom and toilet.
And then we'll wrap. Yeah.
You are aware that we had a very vibrant toilet and bathroom program for indigent persons, and a number got countrywide. Several got in some. I was just looking for a photo here to show you somebody who got one, but I didn't see who got a toilet and bathroom. So it's an ongoing program where persons can do for themselves. But the caller is right. Sometimes if you don't own the land, you're not given permission, because toilets are usually concrete structures, and sometimes so I did see Prime Minister launch a wash program in St. David's. I am just happy, as you mentioned, government is a continuum, that he has continued what we have done. And I don't know if we'll ever eradicate the need for pit latrines, but certainly we have made a serious dent in that and provided that for them. And the caller about the create unemployment. It's a balance in everything, because I heard one economist say that if the minimum wage, if it goes up too high, then employers will employ less persons, so you'll still have unemployment. So I am not discrediting the government for bringing it in. I think it's necessary. I want to commend them for taking that on, but there's a balance. You also have to create jobs and strike a balance so that the wage doesn't make employment prohibited. So there's a balance there.
And that's always a counter argument, and there's various schools of thought. I think, though, as we wrap the program, I think one of the things that needs to be done is decentralization of our planning. As in terms of economies, we need more local industries that can help to sustain us as a people. And as I said, continuum of government. The issue of poverty, whether in Grenada, around the region, the mighty USA or Europe is going to continue to be a challenge for all of us all. I think what we need to do, though, is encourage our people to become self-sufficient, Doc. Grow what we eat what we grow, and don't put our hats where our hands can't reach. And most of all, invest in education. It is a minute gone past the hour of 10 o'clock. We're way gone past our due time, but indeed it's always a pleasure. Ms. Modeste, Curwen, I want to say thanks for being part of the conversation. It's always a pleasure having you here. To all listeners, our viewers, those of you on social media, we say thanks for being part of the conversation. So long, everybody. In just about half an hour, joining me in studio from the ECCB would be Linda Felix Berkeley, and the conversation will be touching and concerning planning, Doc, for the golden years, the retirement years. And it's not a sexy conversation. It's not one a lot of us Grenadians have. But here's what we do. We live our lives. And when we realize all is catching us, we then call upon the government and ask, what can the government do for me? Hello, make hay while the sun shines. That's the conversation. Tomorrow would be the government's turn at the turntable here with me. We see how that turns out. Until then, so long, everybody. JC loves you. Have a great one.